Hello, my name is John Horgan. I'm a science writer, and I also teach at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I've been recording conversations with some of my colleagues at Stevens, especially those who teach social science and humanities, to try to give people out there a sense of who we are, and especially prospective students. So with me today is one of my buddies at Stevens, Michael Kowal. And Mike, just introduce yourself quickly and say who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Kowal. I'm an assistant professor of computational social science. I just finished up my third year here at Stevens. So computational social science is this weird hybrid field. It's relatively new and it's not necessarily well known. My PhD is actually in political science. Most of my research revolves around sort of American politics and the ways in which that we can understand how American politics works, from campaign finance, Congress, political communications, social media, through the study of large-scale data. So whether that's, millions of campaign donations through agencies through political action committees like Act Blue, or it's, millions of tweets by members of Congress or people tweeting about the election, it's the combination of trying to use data science using statistics along with rich theory of how people work, of society. So it's combining those brand new data science tools that have emerged in the last 10 or 15 years with what we already know about how society and how individuals act. So most of my research uses a couple of specific tools. Most of it looks at social network analysis, basically how individuals and organizations. My dissertation looked at corporations and how corporations interact with one another to influence their political behavior. So if a company is giving, does that influence the companies that they're connected through like the Business Roundtable or other trade associations to then give to those candidates or lobby on those issues? The other sort of aspect of my research that I've been doing a lot with recently is natural language processing. We have millions and millions of books and tweets and all sorts of other documents, more than we can ever possibly read. So how do we make sense of such massive amounts of data? And that's where natural language processing comes in.
Wow, I didn't even know about that part of your part of your research. Let me ask you, Mike. I just went and looked at your page on Stevens, and I saw that you had experience. And I maybe I knew this originally and just forgot, but you have experience in politics. Back in 2011, I think you worked for, what was it, a Massachusetts?
Yeah, so I actually, after college, actually my senior year of college, I was hired as a legislative aide for a representative from Massachusetts. So I spent 3 years in between college and grad school actually working professionally in politics. And I think that's one of the things that I really helped me to understand and ground my understanding of politics, more so than some of the sort of theoretical stuff that a lot of people have put out there, right? There's oftentimes a disconnect between the ideal of how people interact and then sort of seeing how the sausage is made behind the scenes. One of the things that I found when I was there, and this is something I learned as a staff member, like if I needed information, I would go to other people. I would tap into these networks of other staffers, and I would see how my boss would tap into different networks of colleagues and people that he could rely on, and how those networks actually helped to influence the political process. And that really got me sort of launched on this idea of like trying to understand how these organizations, not just institutionally how they work, but how those people and those sort of personal connections between representatives and lobbyists and representatives and their constituents, how that sort of give and take influences the political process. And that really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And it sort of steered me away from wanting to go and practice law, which most people in that field did, to trying to understand what it is that's actually driving politics. And I think it's a lot more than just sort of the individual concerns that much of the traditional literature made it seem, that people make their own internal decisions sort of absent from this sort of larger social context. And it didn't seem right to me. But one of the things that I'm really trying to do, and sort of this is a goal of mine, right now at Stevens, we have a computational social science graduate certificate, which allows graduate students as well as undergrads that want to get this type of certificate to learn data science skills, but with applications to the real world. One of my real goals, we're working on a quantitative social science undergraduate degree here at Stevens. And one of my real goals for that would be sort of a capstone where students actually go and take these data science skills, take the things that they learn, and then go to, a local, government, go to the city of Hoboken and help them analyze data, or help a group that's trying to, build a new project along the waterfront, help them maybe analyze surveys, or help them do the types of things that can help them sell these projects to the public, to politicians, help with economic analysis, these types of things. So I do think that there is a point for that. I don't know if I ever want to run for office. Working for a politician made me see some of the sacrifices that a lot of those people have to make. But I do think that there's a lot of valuable resources here at Stevens and elsewhere in the academy that can be leveraged to help us have better informed policymaking.
Well, God knows we could use some smart, well-trained people in politics these days. To what extent do current events end up becoming part of what you talk about in the classroom?
Yeah.
First, can you tell me, first of all, what classes are you going to be teaching this fall, for example? And then, then I'll come back to the current events question.
Yeah, so this fall I'm going to be teaching actually a course on Congress. So going back to my roots a little bit, this is actually different than many of the classes I teach. Normally I teach classes like Computers and Society here at Stevens. I'm actually teaching that currently in the summer session. Those are both very much in many ways current events classes. The Congress class obviously will be in the middle of a congressional election. My original hope for this particular class was that actually students would, part of their grade would be to go and find a congressional candidate and, volunteer for them, for a day or two as part of their sort of their class grade, right? So whether it's, canvassing, knocking on doors, whether it's, making phone calls, but, to get them a little bit of that type of experience. So that sort of hands-on aspect of it, I think, is important. As we see, obviously, right now, there's massive battles going on in Congress over things like increasing the $600 or extending the $600 unemployment benefit, and sort of the little minutia of how these members of Congress sort of have to negotiate with one another. How they negotiate between parties, how they negotiate within their parties, and also with the executive branch is all pretty fascinating. So all that sort of plays into it. In terms of current events, I think the Computers and Society class is one of my favorites in terms of thinking about current events. It's absolutely something where, this is mainly for computer science students, and it's a way for them to actually think about sort of what they're doing in a way that I think they don't necessarily get in many of their computer science classes. It's thinking about the big picture ethics. And most of that class is essentially a theoretically and historically informed current events class. So we study everything from, there was a shooting last year in Pensacola, Florida at a Navy base. And there's an ongoing discussion about, can the FBI force Apple to unlock the iPhone of that shooter to get information? And it comes down to things like, First Amendment rights. So we go into what is speech, right? Is computer code speech? It goes into this idea of privacy, individual privacy, the right to privacy versus security. And students think about these things in a way that, when they're just thinking about coding something, they may not necessarily think about, the next steps, what can be done with that code. Even now, thinking about COVID-19, when we talk about something like COVID, there's a lot of proposals out there for, individual tracking using cell phones, right? So do we track people for contact tracing and these types of things? And there's a lot of concern about, okay, well, do we want to give the government access to our GPS data at all times? Well, maybe we give it to a third-party company that has that data and then uses it. Well, is that really any better in many ways? So these are the types of things that I think do inform us in the classroom. And for my own research, working on things like how we can better leverage social media to get out messages about COVID-19, right? Like what types of frames, what types of networks online on Twitter and elsewhere can actually be utilized to get these types of messages out.
Let me just ask you something that I've struggled with myself. to what extent do you feel you should reveal your own views? I mean, you're talking about a lot of hot button topics, politics and gun violence and all these things, privacy issues. How much, when you get involved in the discussions, do you end up saying what you actually believe?
So this is actually a really tricky thing, right? So there are times when I definitely reveal some of my own particular views, but oftentimes I'll actually take somewhat controversial views. I'll try to play devil's advocate a little bit just to get sort of the other side, right? We may not have many conservatives or we may not have many liberal students within a given class. So maybe I'll take one side that I don't necessarily agree with to get that out there. It is tricky. But one thing I do often stress to my students is okay, maybe you can tell I value privacy more than this idea of security. That's fine. You might take the opposite. There's no right or wrong answer to these types of questions. These are the big sort of ethical and philosophical questions that philosophers and ethicists have been dealing with in different forms for a century, right? So we talk about self-driving cars with Tesla, right? Which in many ways, if that goes wrong, do you kill the little old lady on the street or do you save the passengers? That's an example of the trolley problem that's been going on for, a century. I have my own views on those types of things, but I tell the students that, look, there's no right or wrong answer. What you need to be able to do is defend it, and you need to support it with, evidence, with, solid background. It's not enough to say, I think everyone should have a gun without any real sort of knowledge or facts or anything behind it, right? Or say that we need privacy and then simply ignore things there are actually terrorists out there. Now that threat might be overstated, but there are people who, want to kill you. So where do you sort of get into the sort of middle ground? And oftentimes many of these things where you sort of come to a compromise, and that sort of is tricky because we do have, there's no right or wrong answer. So what I tell the students is, look, I'm not looking for you to give me what you think I want. What I want is to know what you think with, solid evidence behind it. So even if I do reveal some of my preferences, I try not to come out too openly for many of these things. Sometimes it's hard though.
All right, just one more question. Yeah. You're home, I assume, and you're in a room with some instruments behind you. What's going on there? So I assume you do play the banjo and the guitar and the fiddle?
Yeah, so banjo and guitar, yes, I do. I have around my house, I think I have something like 7 guitars. And the fiddle is a sort of long-term project of trying to learn. So yeah, it's been a little bit slow. Hopefully maybe if we get a little bit more time at home, I can dedicate some more time to it. But with research and boxing and all the other activities that I like to do in teaching, it's sometimes hard to find all the time to do those. But yeah, it is something that I've been doing since 5th grade, I think, playing guitar, and probably since college, with banjo. So it's a little bit of a hobby and an activity that I do.
That's great. One of the nice things about doing these videos with people is that I'm learning a lot of stuff about my colleagues that I didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mike. And I hope, well, I don't know what's going to happen this fall, but I hope one way or another we can hang out.
We can connect via Zoom or something.
Yeah. And good luck.
All right. Thanks, John.